Apache woman was a personal slave until a cowboy freed her and made her his wife.
Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
Texas frontier, winter 1882. Elias Boone had been up since before light. The snow had come in heavy through the night and packed itself along the fence line near the northern ridge. Some of his cattle had started drifting too close to the cut in the land where the creek sometimes ran in spring. He didn't like them near the slope. Too easy to fall, too easy to lose one and not even know till the thaw. He was 32, not old but not green, with a worn duster, dark hair he cut himself, and pale blue eyes that rarely looked at anyone straight on anymore. Since the war ended and took most of his family with it, his younger brother to gunfire, his parents to sickness during the same month, he'd built his place up quiet and slow. 5 years of fence posts, sweat, and cattle that didn't ask for more than feed and water. That suited him fine. People took more than they gave. He didn't drink, didn't visit town unless he had to. He spoke when necessary, but never just to fill the air. His mind was on nothing in particular, just wood, snow, and barbed wire, when the voices came. Harsh, male, carrying across the cold like broken glass. One voice cussed sharply. Another laughed. And then a short cry. A woman. Not loud. Muffled. Like someone trying not to scream. Elias paused mid-rap with the wire. He didn't move right away. His hands stayed where they were, the wind hissing across the back of his neck. There were things you learned to ignore out here. Drunken men, fights that weren't yours, people trading trouble for coin. But that sound, it stuck. He let the wire coil drop to the snow, grabbed his gloves off the post, and swung up onto his horse without a word. His jaw was locked tight. His gut already knew what he'd find. He didn't hurry. He rode steady. He found them about half a mile up the trail, where the trees broke open near the ridge. 2 men with a covered wagon had stopped at a narrow pull-off. One was watering the horses. The other had thrown down a heap of old burlap and bundled fabric on the ground next to the rear wheel. Except it wasn't just fabric. She was on her knees, arms behind her, chained through the metal spoke. Her dress was torn. What was left of a deerskin garment that had once held color and pride, now faded, dirted, slashed open across one shoulder and across the chest. Elias saw the top curve of her breast showing where the neckline had given. Her skin was darker than the men's, Apache or nearby tribe, he figured, and dotted with old bruises and small, dark scars. Her hair was long, messy, tangled, with feathers and leather strings woven in. She didn't look up. Her arms shook slightly, maybe from cold, maybe not. Her bare legs were tucked under her, toes red from the snow. Elias dismounted, slow and visible, one gloved hand resting on the horn of his saddle. The older man saw him first. "Something you need, stranger?" Elias didn't answer right away. His eyes were on the woman. She still hadn't looked up. That alone said more than shouting ever could. The man stood upright, mid-40s, belly showing under his coat, eyes sharp like he was always waiting for someone to start a fight. The other one was younger, skinny, with a patchy beard and nervous hands. "I said," Elias cut and flat. "She for sale?" The older man blinked. "What's it to you?" "She yours. She's property, bought and paid for." He said it casually, like discussing a broken mule. "We're taking her to Maynard's Crossing. Got a buyer. Personal use." He smirked. The younger one chuckled. Elias didn't move. "I'll take her." "You'll what?" He reached under his coat, pulled a weather-worn pouch from his saddlebag, and held it out. Folded bills. He didn't count them. It was more than he'd spent on supplies in 6 months. The older man didn't reach for it. "You serious? Take the money. Unchain her. You don't even know if she works." Elias's tone changed slightly. Just enough. "Unchain her." The younger one hesitated, looking at his partner. The older man exhaled through his nose and waved him on. "Go on. Ain't worth the trouble." As the younger one fumbled with the lock, Elias knelt in the snow but didn't touch her. She flinched anyway. He took off his coat and set it down beside her. She turned her head slowly, eyes glassy but focused. Her lips were split, her jaw clenched. She didn't speak. He stood and extended his hand. She didn't take it right away. She looked at him, not as a savior, just trying to measure what kind of man he was. Then, finally, she reached. Her fingers were cold, but steady. He pulled her up gently, gave her the coat, and helped her onto the back of his horse. She winced as she sat behind him. He didn't say anything. He didn't look back at the two men. He just turned and rode. Back at the cabin. It took over an hour to get home. The snow was worse now, coming down steady. She held on to him with her arms around his middle, not tight, but enough to stay upright. He felt every shake in her body. She didn't cry. When they got to the cabin, he dismounted first and helped her down. She nearly slipped, but caught herself. He pushed the door open, let her in first. Inside was plain. A hearth in the corner, low table, chair, bed against the back wall. No frills, just warmth, space, and shelter. She didn't speak. She stood awkwardly, still wrapped in his coat, arms stiff. Elias took his hat off, placed it on the peg. He crouched by the fire, added fresh wood, and brought the flames up. Then he filled a pot with water and set it near the edge of the coals. She still hadn't moved, just stood, unsure she was safe. He brought her a wool blanket, set it gently on the bed. "You can sit," he said. His voice was low, no emotion in it. "You're safe here." She looked at the blanket, then at him. Her voice came, cracked and soft. "Why'd you do that?" He didn't answer right away. He looked into the fire. "Because I could," he said finally. "Because I've been through enough to know what's right." She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap, coat still wrapped around her. He brought a bowl of stew a few minutes later, left on the table. Then he stepped outside. The wind was loud again, scraping along the walls of the cabin. He sat on the porch and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, staring into the snow-covered woods. He didn't know her name. She didn't know his. But she was inside, and he made a choice. He didn't regret it. The fire crackled steadily as evening pulled its long shadows across the cabin walls. The wind had slowed, but not stopped. Snow still came down in a quiet, steady curtain outside. Inside, the silence between them remained, but it was no longer brittle, just still. Iana sat where she'd been left. Elias's coat pulled tight over her shoulders. Her dress, what was left of it, hung damp and open in places that made her uneasy. Her arms were bare except for the fading bruises and old scabs. The side slit up her thigh, let the cold seep in, even near the fire. But she hadn't asked for anything. She didn't move much. She didn't know if she was allowed to. Elias came back in without warning. The door creaked slightly. She didn't flinch, but her back straightened. He carried a folded wool shirt and a worn pair of trousers. He didn't walk toward her, just set them neatly on the edge of the table, beside the stew bowl she still hadn't touched. "They'll be big," he said quietly, "but they're clean, warmer than what you've got." Iana looked at the clothes, then at him. Her eyes were tired but alert. He didn't stare at her body, not even once. He didn't scan the curve of her chest or the space where her dress had ripped near the neckline. He looked at her face, only her face. She stood slowly, the coat held tight around her, and took the clothes without speaking. He turned and stepped outside again, giving her privacy without needing to be asked. She dressed in silence, slowly, carefully, folding the coat and placing on the bed when she finished. The trousers were loose and cinched at the waist with a belt she found hanging near the wall. The shirt hung long on her frame, but it covered her. For the first time in months, maybe years, her body wasn't being looked at like a thing. When Elias returned, she was sitting again, this time straighter. The bowl was empty, the spoon laid neatly across it. He nodded once, quietly, and collected the dish. As he rinsed it in warm water near the fire, she studied him. "Do you live alone?" she asked. He nodded, still turned away. "For how long?" "5 winters." She watched his back. Broad shoulders, dark hair curling slightly where it met the collar of his shirt. His movements were methodical, precise, not cautious, just used to routine. The way a man lived who only ever answered to himself. He dried the dish and set it upside down on a cloth. She waited a moment before asking again. "Why did you help me?" He turned toward her, not defensive, just quiet. "No one else was going to. You don't even know who I am." "No," he said, "but I saw what they were doing. That was enough." She looked down. Her fingers traced the edge of the blanket on her lap. Her hands were small but calloused. She'd worked hard in her life, before she was taken, no doubt, before she became property. "They call me Ayana," she said after a moment. "I don't know if it's still mine." "It's yours," Elias said with no hesitation. He didn't ask more. He didn't press her to explain, but his tone had weight to it, like something solid settling into the floor. Ayana looked at him again, this time not as a threat, but as something unfamiliar, a man who didn't want something from her. "What's your name?" "Elias. Elias Boone." She said it once under her breath, testing the shape of it in her mouth, then nodded. She didn't speak for the rest of the night, and neither did he. Later, as darkness filled the corners of the room, Elias unrolled his second blanket and laid it near the hearth. He didn't take the bed. He didn't offer it. He simply made his space on the floor like it was normal. She watched from the edge of the mattress, not confused, just quietly taking it in. "You sleep there?" she asked. "I do tonight." She didn't argue. She didn't say thank you. She didn't owe him that yet. But when he turned away and settled beneath the blanket, she laid her head down softly, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she closed her eyes in a place where no one was waiting to hurt her. The next morning would come hard and cold, but for one night, she was safe. And Elias had made peace with the decision he hadn't planned to make. The morning was bitter, cold enough that frost formed along the inside of the window glass, tracing out shapes like cracks in old bone. The fire had died down to glowing embers. Elias was already up. He moved quietly, stacking wood into the stove and striking the flint until a steady orange glow pushed back the gray stillness. He hadn't slept much. The floor was hard, the air sharp, and his mind too full. He glanced toward the bed. Ayana was still there, curled on her side, facing the wall. She hadn't stirred through the night. Not from fear, not from cold. He noticed that and took it as something small but important. She had trusted him enough to sleep. That meant more than she knew. He made coffee and reheated leftover beans and bacon in a skillet. The smell filled the cabin. Ayana stirred. When she sat up, her eyes scanned the room. No alarm, just cautious habit. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, tangled from sleep. The shirt she wore fell past her hips, and the trousers were rolled at the ankles, but she looked more present today, less like someone expecting to be handled. Elias poured 2 tin cups of coffee, set one on the table for her. She approached slowly, still barefoot. Her steps were quiet. He spoke first. "I've got a ride to town today." She froze. "I'll only be a few hours," he said. "I need supplies. Flour, kerosene, some nails. Won't be long." He paused, then added, "You can stay here, or come with me. I don't expect anything either way." Ayana looked toward the window, where snow drifted past the glass in a slow, constant hush. "I'll stay," she said finally. "I'm not ready for town." He nodded once. "You'll be safe here." She didn't question that. Something in the way he said it made it feel certain. He finished eating in silence and took time packing the saddlebag, adding a few coins, a folded list, a spare rope. Before he left, he took out a second coat from the trunk by the door, heavier than the first, and hung it on a hook near the fire. "Use it if it gets cold, and bolt the door when I leave." She stood nearby, arms crossed over her chest. "If someone comes?" "No one will," he said. "But if they do, there's a rifle behind the stove. Loaded. You know how to shoot." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "I do." He looked at her a moment longer, then gave a final nod, stepped out, and shut the door behind him. Ayana stood still for a while. The room felt bigger now, emptier, but not threatening. She walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and watched Elias disappear down the trail on horseback, shoulders square, hat low against the wind. Once he was gone, she moved slowly through the cabin, eyes scanning the space now that she was alone. She touched the edge of the table, ran her fingers over the back of the chair, paused at the mantel above the fireplace. There were only 2 things there: a small carved horse, worn smooth from handling, and a folded piece of paper yellowed with time. She didn't open it, just stared. It felt strange being in a man's home where nothing was hidden, nothing locked, and nothing waiting to trap her. She made herself more coffee, sat at the table, and drank it slow. By the time Elias returned, boots coated in snow, hands stiff from wind, she had swept the floor, organized the tins by the stove, and folded his blanket where he'd left it by the fire. She didn't know why. It just felt like something to do. He noticed, but didn't comment. Had to take the long route back, he said. Bridge at Laramie Creek's frozen solid. He set the supplies on the table and hung his coat by the door. She watched him move, methodical, controlled, always quiet. How far is the town? She asked. 7 miles. Closer if the river's passable. Which it ain't right now. Anyone ask about me? No. She nodded. She didn't ask if he gave a name for her. She knew he hadn't. Later, when the sun dipped behind the hills, Elias split wood outside while she stirred stew inside. They didn't speak much, but something had shifted. As she ladled food into bowls and set them on the table, she paused. You don't ask questions. Elias looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. I figure if someone wants to talk, they will. Ayanna sat across from him. Her hands were steady, her voice quieter. Those men, I wasn't the first they'd sold. He waited, not pushing. I don't know how long I was passed around. Weeks, months. It's all blurred. You don't have to explain anything, he said. She nodded, but she went on anyway. The last buyer, he said I'd do better if I stayed quiet. Said men didn't want a woman who talked back. Her jaw tightened. Said my body was worth more than my words. Elias didn't react. Not on the surface, but his fingers gripped the spoon just a little tighter. When he spoke, his voice was low. He was wrong. That was all. She didn't smile, but she looked at him longer this time. After dinner, he handed her a folded cloth bundle. What's this? Thread, needles, some scraps. Figured you might want to fix your dress. If not, toss it. She opened it gently. Her fingers traced over the old cotton, the strong thread. Thank you, she said. He didn't respond, just picked up the dishes and began to wash them. Ayanna stood near the fire with the cloth in her hands. She felt something unfamiliar sitting under her ribs. It wasn't trust. Not yet, but it was the beginning of something close. Something real. She didn't know him anything, but she was still here. And for the first time, she was starting to believe that might be her choice. The wind died down by morning, but the sky stayed gray. A thin layer of ice glazed over the snow, hardening the ground with each passing hour. Elias woke early, as always, and stepped out to check the shed. The cattle were still penned, and the firewood stack, thanks to his chopping the night before, would last another 2 days. He didn't hear her stir inside until he returned to the cabin, stomping snow from his boots. Ayanna stood near the stove, stirring something in the pot. Her back was straight, her long dark hair tied loosely at her neck with a scrap of string. She still wore the oversized shirt and trousers, but something about the way she moved had changed. Less guarded, more purposeful. You don't have to cook, Elias said. She didn't turn. You brought me here. You gave me food. I can stir a pot. He didn't argue. He took off his coat, hung it beside the door, and moved to wash up at the basin. I fixed the dress, she added. What was left of it? He glanced toward the table where it now lay folded, clean, patched, reshaped. The neckline had been stitched, though it still dipped low. The torn shoulder now held together with a clever knot of thread. She had salvaged it piece by piece. You did good, he said. I don't know if I'll wear it again, but I didn't want to see it like that. He nodded, understanding something deeper behind the words. That dress wasn't just clothing. It was the only thing she'd had when she was taken. Restoring it was her way of reclaiming something. They ate quietly. As they sat, Ayanna finally asked something she hadn't before. Why didn't you go into town much? Elias didn't look up. He chewed his bite, swallowed, then spoke. Used to, before the war. And after? There wasn't much left after. I had a brother. He enlisted before me. Died in Tennessee. Parents got sick that same winter. I came back to an empty house and a letter I never wanted to read. He paused. Buried them on the east slope. Started fencing land. Cattle came after. Ayanna didn't speak. She just watched him carefully. You ever marry? She asked. He shook his head. Thought about it once. Before. But I don't think I had it in me after I came back. Too much weight. People look at you like they want you to be something again. Something you were before. She understood that. He glanced up. You. She hesitated. Once, she said. Not by choice. When I was 16. One of the older ones in my tribe took me for himself. My parents couldn't stop it. It didn't last long. He died in a raid. I didn't mourn him. There was no sorrow in her voice, just fact. After that, I lived with my uncle's family, helped with the cooking, cared for the children. And the raids came again. The ones looking for captives to sell. They killed him. Took me. She stopped. Not out of fear, but because that was enough. Elias didn't offer pity, just silence. After a while, she spoke again. You think people like us can start over? He leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest. I think some people don't get the choice. But if you do get it, you take it, even if it's small. Ayana looked toward the window. The light outside was dull and heavy, pressing down on the land. But inside, the warmth was steady. Later, while Elias repaired a bridle strap near the door, she moved to sit by the hearth. She had brought out the dress again, running her hands along the seams. He didn't interrupt her work, just watched from where he sat, hands moving over leather and thread. Then she said something unexpected. I don't want to sleep in your bed. He looked up, startled, not because she was refusing, but because of how calm she was when she said it. I mean, she continued, not because I don't trust you, but because it still feels like it belongs to someone else. A woman you never had. Or maybe a version of you from before. He nodded slowly. It's just a bed, Ayana. She looked at him, eyes steady. Not to me. He understood then. The bed wasn't the problem. It was what it had come to represent. Expectation, vulnerability, being taken without asking. You can have the floor, he said. I'll sleep by the fire. No, she said. You already gave me your home. I'll take the floor. They didn't argue. That was enough. That night, she laid out her blanket near the window, close enough to feel the fire, but far enough to breathe. Elias laid on the bed, hands folded on his chest, eyes fixed to the beams above. The cabin was quiet, safe, but the line between them was clear, and for now, that was what made her feel free. No one had asked anything of her, and she had chosen the floor. On her own terms. That choice meant everything. The days that followed settled into a rhythm, not quite normal, but no longer fragile. The snow stopped falling, though the cold clung to the air. Outside, the land looked quiet, hard, colorless, silent under layers of ice and time. But inside the cabin, something was beginning to shift. Elias noticed it in small ways first. Ayana began moving through the space with more comfort, less hesitation. She swept the floor without being asked. She placed dry kindling beside the stove each morning. When he came in from working the corral or checking the fence line, he'd sometimes find a pot simmering on the fire and a cup of warm broth waiting. But she still didn't talk much, and he never pushed. He respected that silence. One afternoon, as Elias hammered a warped board back into place along the shed, Ayana stepped outside. She wore the same patch dress now layered under his coat, and her feet were wrapped in thick wool socks and old leather moccasins he'd found in a chest of his mother's belongings. She stood for a while just watching him work, her arms crossed loosely. Then she stepped down from the porch and walked to where he stood. You need help? He paused, surprised, but nodded. Hold this board steady. She pressed her hands to the wood, fingers trembling slightly from the cold. He drove the nail through, careful not to jar it too hard. When it was secure, she stepped back. I used to help my uncle mend fences, she said. Before everything changed. Elias looked at her, saw the way her shoulders stayed firm despite the chill, the way her hair moved in the wind, tangled and heavy. She was no stranger to labor, that much was clear. He just hadn't expected her to offer it so soon. You're good at it, he said. Her lips curved slightly, not a smile, not quite, but something close. That evening, she cooked venison stew with herbs he hadn't touched since the last harvest. The cabin smelled like something alive again. After they ate, Elias cleared his throat. You ever think about leaving? She looked up from where she sat at the table, legs tucked beneath her. Where would I go? He shrugged. Anywhere. North. West. Back to your people, if any survived. Ayana shook her head slowly. There's no one left to go back to. Her tone was calm, not bitter. I don't belong anywhere, she added. Not anymore. He didn't reply. Not right away. You belong here, he said eventually. If you want to. She studied him. Not with hope. With caution. You don't even know me. I know you've done more good here in a week than most folks do in a year. That's enough for me." She didn't respond, but she stayed up longer that night. The next morning, Elias returned from chopping firewood to find her outside, kneeling in the snow by the garden plot beside the cabin. It was long dead, but she was clearing away debris, broken sticks, dry weeds, wind-blown trash from months past. He approached slowly. "You planning to plant something in the frost?" he asked. "Not now, but in spring," she said without looking up. "I figured if I'm staying, we might want food that isn't salted meat and beans." It was the first time she'd said it out loud, "if I'm staying." That afternoon, they worked together. She carried wood, he dug post holes. No words were needed, just the sound of footsteps, wind, and the occasional grunt as Elias lifted something heavier than he should have. At one point, he slipped on a patch of ice, landing hard on his side. Ayanna rushed to him before he could push himself up. "You all right?" she asked, her hand on his forearm. He winced, nodding. "Just my pride." Her fingers lingered longer than they had to. That night, she didn't lay her blanket by the window. Instead, she dragged it to the space near the fire, closer to the bed. Not touching, not close enough to invite questions, but nearer than before. Elias noticed. He didn't say anything, but he didn't turn his back to the wall when he lay down either. The distance between them was still there, but it was smaller now, and neither of them seemed in a hurry to widen it again. The thaw came slower than expected. Days stretched long with gray skies and wet cold. Snow turned to slush, then ice again each night, making everything slick and slow. But the air was different now, less bitter, almost soft. The ground hadn't bloomed, but it had stopped dying. And inside the cabin, something had begun to warm too. Ayanna no longer waited for Elias to ask her to help. She joined him at the woodpile, carried buckets, wiped tools clean. She adjusted the saddle straps without being told how. She still didn't talk much, but she looked him in the eye now. She sat closer during meals. When they passed each other near the stove or by the doorway, their shoulders sometimes brushed, and neither of them moved away too fast. That night, the wind was calm, the fire low. Elias sat by the hearth, oiling the worn leather of his boots. Ayanna sat nearby on the floor, her legs folded under her, brushing tangles from her thick hair with her fingers. Her dress was on again, patched clean, cinched tighter at the waist with a strip of braided cloth she'd made herself. It fit better now. Her figure filled it naturally, and though it still showed skin, her collarbone, the soft curves of her chest, the lines of her strong legs, it no longer felt like something shameful. It belonged to her again. He noticed the way her skin looked in firelight, golden in some places, shadowed in others. He didn't look away, but he didn't stare either. When she caught his gaze, he didn't apologize. "You ever think about marrying?" she asked suddenly. Elias set the boot down. The question wasn't flirtation. It was quiet, honest, and serious. "Once," he said, "years ago, before the war." "What happened?" "She didn't wait," he said simply. Didn't blame her. "I came back different." Ayanna nodded. "Do you think you try again?" Elias looked into the fire. His jaw tightened. "I don't know. Maybe. If it was the right reason. Right person." She was quiet for a moment. Then, gently, "You never tried to touch me." His eyes met hers, steady. "I'm not here to take anything," he said. "I know, but you're a man, and I'm a woman, and I've been around men who didn't wait to ask. I'm not them." She nodded, eyes still locked to his. Her voice dropped lower. "I haven't chosen anything for myself in a long time." Elias didn't move. He didn't reach for her. He didn't break the moment with noise. He let her speak. Ayanna stood slowly and crossed the short distance between them. She knelt beside him, closed now. Her knees brushed his thigh. She placed a hand gently on his chest. Not testing, just being there. "If I touch you," she whispered, "it's because I want to." Elias didn't answer with words. He reached up and covered her hand with his, rough fingers over her softer ones. His grip wasn't tight, just present. She leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't fast. It wasn't urgent. It was the kind of kiss that held no questions and didn't ask for anything back. His free hand rested on her waist, careful. She tasted like smoke and broth, and something he hadn't known he missed. When they pulled apart, she didn't move far. I'm not ready for more than that, she said. I wasn't asking, he replied. She stayed beside him, resting her head against his shoulder. They sat like that a long while, saying nothing, the fire crackling low. Later, when the cabin turned dark and quiet, she rolled her blanket out again, not far from the fire, but this time within arm's reach of the bed. He watched her settle down, one hand tucked under her head, the other resting near her chest. Before he lay down himself, Elias spoke. You're not property here. Not mine, not anyone's. I know, she said, but hearing it still mattered. And when they both finally slept, it was with a peace that had not come easy, but had finally come by choice. By the time March pushed its way into the valley, the snow had mostly gone. The ground was soft and wet, and patches of green showed along the hillsides. Elias had started clearing the lower field, pulling dead brush and breaking up frozen dirt with slow, methodical strikes of the spade. Ayanna joined him most mornings. She wrapped her hair tighter now, wore the mended dress beneath a heavier shawl she'd sewn from an old blanket. Her hands blistered the first few days, but she didn't complain. She wanted to be part of it. That morning, while Elias worked the far end of the field, Ayanna stayed behind to clean out the shed. The door had stuck all winter. Inside, rusted tools, sacks of moldy grain, and broken crates filled the corners. She moved carefully, stopping when she found something beneath an old tarp. 2 wooden cribs, dusty, disassembled. When Elias returned, his hands muddy to the wrists, he found her sitting beside them on the floor, the tarp folded neatly beside her. She didn't ask, just looked at him. They were for my brother's twins, he said, voice low. He built them himself before he enlisted. Said he wanted to be ready. Her eyes stayed on his. What happened to them? They never got born. His wife passed from fever a month before he was shot. Both gone before I made it back. Ayanna didn't press. She reached out, ran her hand along the wood grain of the cradle rail. It's good work. Elias nodded once. He was better with tools than I ever was. They didn't speak of it again. But that evening, she sanded the surface of one of the cribs, removing the splinters. After supper, as dusk fell and the sky went purple behind the hills, they sat outside the cabin for the first time in weeks. The wind had eased. Frogs had returned to the creek. She leaned against the porch post, sipping from a cup of warm tea, while Elias sat nearby on the top step, sharpening the blade of his hatchet. You always planned to live alone? She asked. No, he said. But after a while, it became easier not to expect anyone. I don't like being owned, she said, but I don't like being alone either. He set the hatchet aside, eyes fixed forward. You're not alone. I know. She set the cup down, then moved beside him on the step. Her thigh pressed against his. He didn't shift away. I've been thinking, she said, fingers fidgeting with the edge of her shawl. If I stayed here, really stayed, it wouldn't be as someone you rescued. Elias looked at her now. You'd stay as what, then? As someone who chose it. As someone who helped build it. He didn't respond immediately. He looked out at the land. Then he turned back to her and spoke. Then that's how it'll be. She leaned her head on his shoulder. He rested his chin lightly against her hair. Inside the cabin that night, she didn't unroll the blanket. She sat on the edge of the bed and waited. Elias washed up by the basin, then stood nearby, hesitant. His hands were clean, but twitching slightly, like a man preparing for something delicate, not dangerous. Ayanna looked at him. You're not taking anything tonight, she said. You're receiving. He nodded. They moved slowly. She guided his hands. Her dress fell halfway off her shoulder, revealing more of the neckline, the skin he'd seen in glimpses but never touched. She was warm, real, not trembling. She reached for him first, kissed him again like before, only this time longer, deeper. Her fingers rested on the front of his shirt. His breath slowed. They lay together without urgency. Skin met skin, but not for claiming, for closeness. When she finally laid her head against his bare chest, listening to the steady thud of his heart, her fingers traced the scar along his ribs. What was this from, she whispered. Musket ball. Shiloh. It missed, she said. Barely. She kissed that spot once, softly. Later, when they both drifted into sleep, her head was still resting against him. One arm draped across his stomach. The old blanket lay forgotten on the floor. And the woman who'd once been passed between hands now chose, clearly, quietly and fully, where she would lay her head. Morning came in slow and golden, sun filtering through the cracks in the shutters, dust lifting through the light in soft currents. The fire had burned down to coals. Ayana woke first, eyes blinking into the stillness. She was warm. Elias's arm rested across her waist, his breath steady behind her. For a moment, she stayed still, just listening. Not for threats, not for orders, not for footsteps, just for him. The rhythm of his breath, the heat of his body, her own calm heartbeat. The quiet was different now. It wasn't isolation. It was peace. She shifted gently, and he stirred, eyes opening halfway. No panic, just presence. He looked at her, then down to where his hand still rested at her side. He didn't move it. "You all right?" he asked, voice low and rough from sleep. She nodded. "Better than I've been in a long time." He sat up slowly, muscles stiff from too many nights on hard ground before she'd come. She pulled the blanket around her as she rose and moved to the stove, stirring the coals back to life. No rush, no fear, just a woman rising to start a day. As they shared breakfast, simple bread and beans, Elias finally asked what had been circling his mind for days. "What name do you want me to call you?" She paused with her spoon, considering. "Ayana is mine," she said, "but it was given to me by people who are gone now. I'll keep it, but maybe someday I'll take another. When I'm ready." He nodded, respecting the weight of it. The day brought hard work. Elias repaired the gate leading to the south pasture, while Ayana cleaned out the last of the root cellar and swept the cabin top to bottom. That evening, she brought out a wrapped bundle and laid it on the table between them. "I want to show you something." He untied the cloth and unfolded it. Inside was the old dress, her original deerskin dress, now fully restored. The fringe had been cleaned, the beadwork reset, the torn seams stitched strong with rough thread and care. "I fixed it," she said, "not because I need to wear it, but because it's part of what I've lived through. I don't want to forget it." Elias touched the edge of the fabric, his fingertips rough against the softened hide. "It's strong," he said. "So am I," she answered quietly. Later, they sat outside again, the spring wind brushing across their faces. She leaned into him, her shoulder beneath his arm. The land stretched wide and quiet in front of them, hills dark against the last light. "What will people say?" she asked suddenly, "when they find out what I was?" Elias didn't hesitate. "They can say what they want. You're not what was done to you." She nodded slowly, but her voice was softer. "I still feel like they'll stare." "They probably will," he admitted, "but they'll see me beside you too. That changes how people look." Ayana turned toward him. "Do you mean that?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." She was quiet a moment longer, then asked, "Do you want me to be your wife someday?" He didn't flinch. He didn't dance around it. "Yes," he said, "but only if it's what you want. Not because I took you in. Not because you feel you owe me." "I don't feel like I owe you," she said. "That's why it matters." They sat until the sun disappeared behind the ridge, wrapped in the quiet understanding that nothing needed to be decided that night. Not officially, not with words, but the truth of it was already there, settled in how they moved around each other, how they spoke, how they didn't. That night, when they went to bed, there was no distance left between them. No blanket on the floor. No space between their hands. Elias fell asleep with his hand resting gently against her stomach, and Ayana laid awake for a long while, one hand covering his. When her eyes finally closed, she was already dreaming of a small field with green shoots and a cradle repaired by quiet hands, waiting by the fire. The first wildflowers broke through the soil by late April. Tiny blue blossoms sprouted along the slope behind the cabin, and the creek finally ran with melted snow again. The land had shed its winter skin. So had they. Ayana stood barefoot in the garden bed one morning, her feet sunk into the cool earth. The air smelled of wet soil and ash. She pressed a small mound flat, dropped seeds in one by one, and covered them carefully with her palm. The sun was warm on her shoulders. Elias leaned against the post near the cabin, arms crossed, watching her. "You always move like that," he said quietly, "like you belong to the ground." She glanced up, squinting. "Maybe I do." He pushed off the post and walked toward her. When he knelt beside her, she didn't stop planting. He helped, pressing seeds into the next row without needing to speak. They worked like that for a while. The rhythm was slow, steady. He finished one row, sat back on his heels, and looked at her. I was thinking about town, he said. I need to take some calves in for sale next week. She nodded. I want to take you with me. She didn't answer right away. The wind moved gently through her hair. You think they'll say something? They might, Elias said. But I'll be there. She kept her eyes on the soil for a long moment, then nodded again. Then I'll go. They left the cabin early the following Tuesday, riding together in the small wagon. She wore the mended dress beneath a brown shawl. Her hair was braided back, feathers woven in just as she liked it. She didn't wear a bonnet. She didn't want to hide. Elias didn't tell her how to sit, what to say, or where to walk. When they arrived in town, he offered his arm. She took it. People stared, just as she expected. Some recognized her. Others whispered, but none spoke directly. At the general store, the owner, a stout man with graying whiskers and a pinched look, froze when he saw her. Elias's voice came firm but calm. We'll need salt, sugar, cornmeal, and 2 yards of cotton cloth. She's doing the garden this year. The man hesitated, then nodded, began to pack the items. Ayanna said nothing. She stood tall beside Elias, her fingers lightly touching his arm. On the way out, a man near the blacksmith muttered something low. Elias heard it. So did Ayanna. Elias stopped, turned. You say something? The man shifted, shrugged, didn't repeat it. Elias didn't need to step forward. His silence said more than words. They returned to the cabin late that evening. Ayanna was quiet, thoughtful. When they reached the porch, she turned to him. I didn't think I could face them, she said. Not ever again. But I wasn't alone. Elias looked at her. You never will be. She reached into the wagon bed, pulled out the last of the supplies, a folded bolt of soft cotton, and handed it to him. Then you'll need to help me sew again, she said with a half smile. Days passed, then weeks. Ayanna began sewing new curtains. She tanned hides. She harvested wild herbs from the woods beyond the ridge. Elias built a second shed, then repaired the roof. Neither spoke of the past unless it came up naturally. They didn't need to recount pain to remember it. It lived in their bones. But so did something else now: routine, warmth, presence. One quiet afternoon, Ayanna placed his hand gently on her belly and looked him in the eyes. There was no announcement, no dramatic pause. I'm late, she said. Elias stared at her, letting the words settle. His hand didn't move. You sure? He asked, voice softer than it had ever been. She nodded. He didn't speak again for a long time. He just pulled her into his arms and held her there, breathing into her neck. That evening, as the fire burned low, he took out a small ring he had carved from deer antler. Rough, uneven, but made with care. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He just held it out in the palm of his hand. If you want it, he said. She took it, slid it on herself, and kissed him once, deep, steady, and without fear. By summer, the garden was alive. Corn waist-high, beans climbing trellises. The repaired cradle stood clean and waiting near the hearth. And Ayanna, once passed between hands like a thing to be used, now walked freely across her own land, head held high, belly rounding under the dress she had chosen to keep. She wasn't his possession. She was his wife. And this home, this life, this love, they had built it together from the ashes, from a silence, from a choice to stay.
And that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for hanging out with Where Grit Meets Heart. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out on what's next. See you soon.